Tonight's confession was found on a kitchen table. The person who recorded it walked into a police station exactly 1 hour after hitting stop. What you're about to hear freed an innocent woman and solved a decade-old murder. Before you listen to what I'm about to tell you, I need you to understand something. This recording will be played at a murder trial. My murder trial. The person speaking to you right now will be in handcuffs within the hour. Everything you're about to hear is being recorded on a voice memo that I'm leaving on my kitchen table for police to find when they search my house. This isn't a story. This isn't fiction. This is a confession. 10 years ago, I tried to kill someone who absolutely deserved to die. A monster who had destroyed countless innocent lives and would destroy countless more. But the person who died wasn't him. It was someone I loved more than my own life. And for 10 years, I've watched an innocent woman rot in prison for the murder I committed. In 60 minutes, I'm walking into that police station to confess everything. This recording will be the only evidence of what really happened that night. The only proof that justice has been hunting the wrong person for a decade. But before I destroy my life to save hers, you need to understand something. Sometimes doing the right thing for the right reasons creates more evil than doing nothing at all. This is that story. And once you hear it, you'll understand why I waited 10 years to find the courage to tell the truth. Okay, it's 2:47 a.m. on November 15th. I've been sitting here for 3 hours trying to figure out how to start this. I guess I should just say it. The person I was trying to kill actually deserved to die. He was a monster who had destroyed countless lives and would have destroyed countless more. But instead of him dying, an innocent woman died in his place. And that innocent woman was my sister. I killed my own sister trying to get revenge on the man who destroyed our childhood. The man who stole our innocence. The man who ruined everything good in our lives. But she died instead of him. And another former victim of his, an innocent woman who'd suffered just like we had, has spent 10 years in prison for a murder I committed. This is the story of how I tried to deliver justice and ended up becoming the very evil I was trying to stop. This is the story of how protecting my sister ended up getting her killed. And this is the story of how sometimes, even when someone deserves to die, revenge will always claim the wrong victim. I need to start with him, with Dr. Victor Kane. Because you need to understand what kind of monster he was before you can understand what I became. Dr. Kane ran the foster home where my sister Emma and I lived from when I was 8 until I aged out at 18. 10 years of what everyone on the outside thought was a loving, caring environment for troubled children. Dr. Kane was a master manipulator. Charming, well-educated, respected in the community. He'd built his reputation as someone who specialized in healing childhood trauma. Social workers loved him. The state gave him awards. Families who couldn't have children saw him as a saint who was giving unwanted kids a chance at life. But behind closed doors, Dr. Kane was systematically destroying every child who came through his doors. He didn't just abuse us physically, though there was plenty of that. He didn't just abuse us sexually, though that happened too, to kids who were too young and too broken to understand what was happening to them. Dr. Kane specialized in psychological torture. He would study each child, figure out exactly what they were most afraid of, what they wanted most in the world, what would break them completely. And then he would use that knowledge to destroy them from the inside out. Emma was 4 when we first got there. I was 8. We'd been taken from our parents after they died in a car accident. We had no other family, nowhere else to go. Emma was this tiny, bright little girl who still believed the world was good. She still believed that adults were supposed to protect children. She still believed that if you were good and kind and tried your best, people would love you. Dr. Kane saw that innocence in her and made it his mission to destroy it. He would tell her that our parents had died because she was bad, that she was cursed, and everyone who loved her would die. He would isolate her from me for days at a time, telling her I didn't want to see her, that I blamed her for our parents' death. He would promise her things: a new toy, a special dinner, a chance to call our aunt who lived across the country, and then take them away at the last second, telling her she didn't deserve good things. But the worst part was how he made her grateful for the abuse. He would hurt her, and then comfort her. He would tell her she was worthless, and then act like he was the only person who could ever love someone as broken as her. He would punish her for crying, and then hold her while she tried to stop the tears. He turned her own emotions into weapons against her, made her believe that wanting love was selfish, that needing comfort was weakness, that trusting anyone, even me, was dangerous. And me? I was too young and too scared to protect her. I tried, God knows I tried. But every time I stood up for her, he would hurt her worse and tell her it was my fault for making him angry. Every time I tried to comfort her, he would separate us for weeks. He made me complicit in her suffering by making it clear that any attempt to help her would only make things worse for her. By the time Emma was 12, she was completely broken. She barely spoke unless directly asked a question. She flinched whenever anyone raised their voice. She apologized for everything. For breathing too loud, for taking up space, for existing. But the thing that destroyed me was how she still tried to take care of everyone else. Even after everything he'd done to her, she would save half her dinner for kids who were being punished with no food. She would take the blame for things other kids did to spare them from Dr. Kane's attention. She would clean up messes she didn't make, volunteer for extra chores, do anything she could to make life easier for everyone around her. She was the kindest, most selfless person I've ever known, and Dr. Kane had convinced her that she was worthless. When I aged out at 18, I begged the social workers to let me take Emma with me. But I had no money, no stable housing, no way to prove I could take care of a 14-year-old girl. They said Emma was thriving in Dr. Kane's care, that removing her would be traumatic and disruptive to her progress. I had to leave her there. I had to walk away and leave my baby sister with the man who had spent 10 years destroying her soul. I got a job at Thompson's Auto Repair across town. I'd always been good with my hands, and it turned out I had a natural talent for mechanics. I started as a general helper, but within 6 months I was doing brake work, transmission repairs, everything. Cars made sense to me in a way that people never did. I could take apart an engine and put it back together better than it was before. I found a small apartment, started trying to build a life stable enough that I could come back for Emma. I visited her as often as they'd let me, which wasn't nearly enough. Every time I saw her, she seemed smaller, quieter, more fragile. But she always smiled when she saw me, always asked how I was doing, if I was happy, if I was taking care of myself. She never talked about what was happening to her in that house, but I could see it in her eyes. The fear, the shame, the desperate hope that maybe this time I'd be able to take her home with me. For 4 years I worked at Thompson's, saving every penny I could, building the kind of stable life that social services would approve of. I got promoted to head mechanic, found a bigger apartment, established credit, did everything I was supposed to do to prove I could provide for Emma. When Emma turned 18 and finally aged out, I thought our nightmare was over. I thought we could finally start healing together, start building the life we should have had all along. But Dr. Kane had done his job too well. Emma was so psychologically damaged that she couldn't function in the real world. She was terrified of making decisions, convinced that everything bad that happened was her fault, unable to trust that anyone, even me, actually cared about her. She moved in with me, but she was like a ghost in her own life. She would barely eat unless I specifically told her to. She would sleep on the floor because she didn't think she deserved the bed I'd bought for her. She would apologize for everything, for using too much shampoo, for watching TV, for existing in the space I'd created for us. I tried to get her help, therapy, medication, support groups. But Dr. Kane had trained her too well to believe she didn't deserve help. She would go to appointments to make me happy, but she wouldn't really participate. She was convinced that talking about her problems was selfish, that she was taking resources away from people who really needed them. For 2 years, I watched my sister try to disappear from her own life. And slowly, I realized that as long as Dr. Kane was alive, as long as he was still out there hurting children, Emma would never feel safe. She would never believe that the nightmare was really over. So I started researching him. What I found made me physically sick. Dr. Kane was still running his foster home, still taking in vulnerable children, still being praised as a pillar of the community. And based on what I could piece together from newspaper articles, social media posts, and public records, he was still destroying kids. I found references to former residents who had died by suicide, kids who'd run away and never been found, teenagers who'd aged out and immediately fallen into drugs, prostitution, abusive relationships. A pattern of broken children that stretched back decades. The state had never investigated him. No one had ever filed charges. He was too well respected, too well connected, too careful about who he targeted and how he broke them. All of his victims were kids like Emma and me, children with no family, no advocates, no one who would be believed if they tried to speak out against a beloved community leader. And I realized that Emma and I weren't survivors of his abuse. We were just his latest victims. He was still out there, still hurting children, still destroying lives. And no one was going to stop him. The system had failed to protect us when we were children, and it was failing to protect the kids in his care now. The police wouldn't investigate without evidence I couldn't provide. Social services had already deemed him a model caregiver. Dr. Kane was untouchable through any legal means. But he wasn't bulletproof. I started planning his death on a Tuesday in March, exactly 2 years after Emma moved in with me. She'd had a particularly bad day. Nightmare the night before. Panic attack at her part-time job. Hours of crying because she'd accidentally broken a mug and was convinced I'd be angry with her. I was holding her while she sobbed. This 20-year-old woman who should have been thinking about college and dating and her future, but instead was terrified of taking up too much space on my couch. And I realized that as long as he was alive, she would never be free. He had to die. Not just because he deserved it, though he absolutely did, but because killing him was the only way to save Emma. I spent the next 2 years planning how to do it. I knew it had to look like an accident. Anything obviously murder would bring too much scrutiny, might somehow be traced back to us. I needed something clean, simple, untraceable. During those 2 years of planning, I started following Dr. Kane, learning his routines, his habits, his schedule. That's when I discovered he took his car, a pristine 2019 black Mercedes C-Class sedan with cream leather interior and every luxury feature imaginable, to Martinez Auto Repair for service. The kind of car that announced to the world that its owner was successful, important, untouchable. The kind of car that would make a very believable accident. Once I knew where he serviced his vehicle, I quit my job at Thompson's and applied to Martinez Auto Repair. I used my middle name, and when they called my references, friends who'd agreed to help me, they confirmed I was an experienced, reliable mechanic. I got hired within 2 weeks. My plan was finally in motion. Dr. Kane had been bringing his Mercedes to Martinez for 3 years by the time I started working there. He always requested the premium service package, always acted like he was doing us a favor by gracing us with his business. He was the kind of customer who talked down to the mechanics while pretending to be friendly, who made jokes about blue-collar workers, while expecting us to be grateful for his condescending tips. The first time I worked on his car, about a month after getting hired, he studied my face with a puzzled expression. "You look familiar," he said, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Have we met somewhere before?" My heart hammered against my ribs, but I forced myself to smile casually. "People tell me that a lot," I said, focusing on my clipboard to avoid his stare. "I just have one of those faces, I guess." He watched me for another long moment, his head tilted like he was trying to solve a puzzle. You remind me of someone. Can't quite place it." I shrugged, still not meeting his eyes. "Maybe I look like someone from TV or something. Happens all the time." He seemed to accept this, though I caught him glancing at me a few more times while I worked on his car. Each time, I felt that same chill of recognition, almost clicking into place in his mind. Over the next year and a half, I worked on his Mercedes 6 more times. Each visit, he'd get that same puzzled look, like my face was a word on the tip of his tongue that he couldn't quite remember. But he never made the connection. To him, I was just another faceless worker, barely worth remembering beyond that nagging sense of familiarity, which made him perfect prey. I studied his schedule obsessively. He brought his Mercedes in every 8 weeks like clockwork, always on a Thursday afternoon, always picking it up after 5 p.m. when most of the staff had gone home. He would drive the same route home every time, down Maple Street, onto Highway 7, then that steep, winding hill that led to his neighborhood. There was a sharp curve about halfway down that hill, where cars regularly had accidents, especially when it was raining or if someone was going too fast. If his brakes failed there, well, it would look like a tragic accident. Brake failure happens sometimes, even on luxury cars. All I had to do was wait for his next appointment and make sure I was the one assigned to his brake inspection. The opportunity came on Thursday, November 15th. Dr. Kane's Mercedes was scheduled for its routine service, and I made sure to volunteer for the brake work. I told my supervisor I wanted more experience with European brake systems. Completely normal request for a mechanic trying to advance their skills. I had the car up on the lift by 2 p.m. Spent an hour and a half doing legitimate brake work, replacing the pads, checking the rotors, making sure everything looked perfect on the surface. Dr. Kane was paying for premium service, so he was going to get it. But while I was under there, I made 2 small, precise cuts in the brake lines. Not deep enough to cause immediate failure, but positioned exactly where they would weaken under pressure. When he needed to brake hard, like going down that steep hill at 45 miles per hour, the lines would rupture and he would lose all stopping power. It was elegant, really. The kind of mechanical failure that could happen naturally over time, just accelerated by my interference. Even if investigators looked closely, it would be nearly impossible to prove sabotage rather than metal fatigue or a manufacturing defect. I finished the legitimate work, lowered the car, and put his keys on the counter for pickup. Dr. Kane arrived at 5:15 p.m., exactly as scheduled, paid his bill without really looking at me, and drove away in his perfectly maintained, perfectly sabotaged Mercedes. I went home and made dinner for Emma, helped her with a job application she'd been working on for weeks, watched her favorite movie with her, acted like it was just another normal Thursday, even though I knew that by the next morning, our nightmare would finally be over. But Dr. Kane never drove his car home that Thursday. Instead, he lent it to his daughter. Dr. Kane's daughter, Melissa, was 22 years old, fresh out of college, working at a non-profit that helped homeless families find permanent housing. She was everything her father pretended to be. Genuinely kind, actually devoted to helping people, completely unaware of the monster she'd been raised by. Her car was in the shop, and she needed to get to a work event across town. Dr. Kane offered her his Mercedes, probably seeing it as an opportunity to look like a generous, caring father to his colleagues. Melissa was driving Dr. Kane's car when the brakes failed. She was going down that exact hill I'd planned for him to die on, probably thinking about her work event or her weekend plans or any of the normal things a 22-year-old thinks about. When she tried to brake for the sharp curve, nothing happened. The car went through the guardrail and rolled 3 times before hitting a cluster of oak trees. Melissa died on impact. An innocent young woman who'd spent her life trying to help people died because I'd sabotaged her father's car. A woman who'd never hurt anyone, who was probably one of the few genuinely good people left in the world, died paying for her father's crimes. And Dr. Kane? Dr. Kane was completely destroyed by grief over losing his daughter. The press covered it as a tragic accident. Beloved community leader loses his precious daughter in a freak brake failure. I watched the news coverage from my living room, holding Emma while she cried for a girl she'd never met. Emma, who was so full of empathy that she grieved for strangers, was heartbroken over the death of the daughter of the man who tortured her for 14 years. And all I could think was, I did this. I killed an innocent woman. I made Dr. Kane a victim instead of giving him the justice he deserved. But it got so much worse. The police investigated the accident because brake failure in a newer Mercedes was unusual. They brought in specialists who found evidence of tampering. My cuts in the brake lines were clean enough that a trained investigator could tell they weren't from natural wear. And when they looked for who might have had motive to hurt Dr. Kane, they found Nicole Chen. Nicole was 33 years old, another former resident of Dr. Kane's foster home. She'd aged out 7 years before me, but unlike Emma and me, Nicole had never stopped fighting. She'd been in and out of jail for petty crimes, vandalism, breaking and entering, assault charges that never quite stuck. She had a record of acting out, of letting her anger get the better of her. But more importantly, Nicole had confronted Dr. Kane just 3 weeks before Melissa's death. It happened at a town hall meeting about funding for social services. Dr. Kane was there giving his usual speech about the importance of supporting vulnerable children, playing the role of the caring guardian. And Nicole stood up in the middle of his presentation and called him out. She screamed at him in front of 200 people, called him a predator, a monster, accused him of destroying children's lives. Security had to escort her out while she was still yelling, still trying to tell everyone what he really was. The audience was horrified, not at Dr. Kane, but at Nicole. They saw a clearly troubled woman attacking a respected community leader who was trying to help children. The incident made the local news as a story about the ongoing challenges of helping former foster children reintegrate into society. Dr. Kane handled it perfectly, of course. He expressed concern for Nicole's mental health, said he hoped she would get the help she needed, made himself look even more saintly by refusing to press charges against someone who was clearly struggling. But 3 weeks later, when his car was sabotaged and his daughter died, Nicole became the obvious suspect. The evidence against her was overwhelming. She had clear motive, documented history of abuse at Dr. Kane's foster home, plus the recent public confrontation that proved she was still angry enough to act. She had the means. Nicole had learned auto mechanics during a job training program while in juvenile detention. She knew enough about cars to sabotage brake lines. She had opportunity. Security cameras showed her in the area around the time Dr. Kane's car was being serviced. She'd been doing odd jobs around town, including some cleaning work at businesses near Martinez Auto Repair. And she had tools in her possession that could be used for brake tampering when they searched her apartment. Nicole tried to defend herself, but who was going to believe her? A woman with a criminal record, a history of mental health issues, a documented pattern of acting out violently against authority figures. She kept insisting she would never hurt Melissa, that she only wanted Dr. Kane to face consequences for what he'd done to children. But to the jury, that sounded exactly like what someone would say if they'd been trying to kill their abuser and accidentally killed an innocent person instead. The trial lasted 6 weeks. Nicole had no family to support her. She was completely alone, just like she'd been as a child. She got an overworked public defender who barely had time to prepare her case. The prosecutor painted her as an unstable former foster child who'd let her trauma turn her into a killer. Nicole was convicted of vehicular manslaughter and sentenced to 20 years in prison. An innocent woman went to prison for a crime I committed. And Dr. Kane used his daughter's death to become even more untouchable than before. The grief transformed him into a martyr. The community rallied around him with an outpouring of support that was overwhelming. Donations poured into his foster home. Local businesses offered their services for free. The state fast-tracked funding for his programs. Dr. Kane started the Melissa Kane Foundation for Child Safety, giving speeches about the dangers of untreated trauma and the importance of helping troubled youth before they turned violent. He became the poster child for tragic loss, a grieving father who chose to honor his daughter's memory by helping even more children. The irony was sickening. My attempt to stop him from hurting children had given him more power, more protection, more access to vulnerable kids than ever before. He was more beloved, more respected, more untouchable than he'd been before Melissa died. His grief made him immune to criticism or investigation. Who was going to question a man who'd lost his daughter to violence and responded by dedicating his life to preventing other tragedies? Meanwhile, Nicole sat in prison, another of Dr. Kane's victims paying for his crimes while he basked in sympathy and acclaim. And Emma knew. She never said anything directly. But after Melissa's death, Emma started having worse nightmares. Started asking strange questions about the accident. Started looking at me with this expression I couldn't quite read. Fear, maybe, or recognition. One night, about 6 months after the accident, she asked me, "Do you think Dr. Kane will ever pay for what he did to us?" And when I said I didn't know, she said, "Sometimes I think the only way people like him face justice is if someone makes them face it." She knew. Maybe not the details, maybe not consciously, but some part of her understood that I had tried to kill Dr. Kane and accidentally killed his daughter instead. And that knowledge was destroying her just as much as Dr. Kane's abuse had. Emma started withdrawing from me. She'd still live in my house, still go through the motions of our daily routine, but she was pulling away emotionally. She stopped talking about her dreams, stopped making plans for the future, stopped believing that anything good was possible. I think she was terrified that I was becoming the same kind of monster that Dr. Kane was. Someone who hurt innocent people to get what they wanted. Someone who decided who deserved to live and who deserved to die. And maybe she was right. By the second year after the accident, Emma was barely functioning. She'd quit her job, dropped out of her online classes, spent most of her time sleeping or staring at the wall. I tried to get her help, but how could I explain to a therapist that my sister was traumatized because she suspected I was a murderer? How could I get her treatment for PTSD when I couldn't tell anyone what was really traumatizing her? By the third year, I started researching Nicole's case, reading trial transcripts, looking for ways to prove her innocence without implicating myself. But Nicole wasn't fighting her conviction. Her lawyer told me that Nicole blamed herself for Melissa's death, that she believed her confrontation with Dr. Kane had somehow led to the accident, that she deserved to be punished even if she hadn't physically sabotaged the car. Nicole was serving her sentence believing that her anger had gotten an innocent person killed. She'd attempted suicide twice in prison. She spent every day in anguish over something she hadn't even done. By the 4th year, I was falling apart. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't concentrate on anything. I was seeing Melissa's face everywhere. In every news story about car accidents, in every young woman who looked like her, in every smile that reminded me of the photos from her memorial service. I started visiting her grave. I don't know why. Maybe to apologize, maybe to torture myself, maybe to try to understand how I'd become someone who could kill an innocent person. Her headstone had a quote that destroyed me every time I read it. She spent her life lifting others up. Melissa had been working with homeless families. She'd volunteered at animal shelters in college. She'd spent her weekends reading to kids at the local library. She was the kind of person who made the world genuinely better just by existing in it. And I'd killed her because I wanted to stop her father from hurting people. The irony was so cruel, it felt intentional. I'd wanted to protect innocent children by killing their abuser, and instead, I'd killed someone who had actually dedicated her life to protecting innocent people. By the 5th year, Emma and I were barely speaking. We lived in the same house, but we were strangers. She was a ghost of the person she'd been, and I was consumed by guilt over what I'd done to her, to Melissa, to Nicole. Dr. Kane was still out there, still running his foster home, still destroying children. But now he was protected by his status as a grieving father, his foundation, his reputation as someone who'd turned tragedy into purpose. Nicole was still in prison, still convinced she was responsible for Melissa's death. Melissa was still dead, her life of service cut short because of my need for revenge. And Emma was disappearing a little more every day, destroyed by the knowledge that the person she loved most in the world had become the kind of monster she'd spent her childhood being terrorized by. I started seeing a therapist myself, though I couldn't tell her the real reason for my depression and anxiety. She thought I was dealing with childhood trauma and survivor's guilt. She had no idea I was actually dealing with being a murderer who destroyed multiple lives in a failed attempt at vigilante justice. By the 6th year, I'd started planning my confession. Writing letters to Nicole's lawyer, to the district attorney, to anyone who might be able to help free an innocent woman. But every time I got close to sending those letters, I'd think about Emma. If I confessed, she'd be left completely alone. She was barely holding on as it was. I was convinced that my confession would be the final thing that broke her completely. So I stayed silent. Told myself I was protecting her. Told myself that going to prison wouldn't bring Melissa back or undo the damage I'd done. But really, I was just a coward who was more afraid of facing consequences than I was committed to doing the right thing. By the 7th year, Emma had stopped leaving the house except for doctor's appointments. She'd lost so much weight that she looked skeletal. She barely spoke except to apologize for existing. I realized that my silence wasn't protecting her. It was killing her. The secret was eating both of us alive, turning our relationship into a lie, making it impossible for either of us to heal. Dr. Kane was still destroying children. Nicole was still in prison. Melissa was still dead. And Emma was dying slowly from the inside out. My attempt to deliver justice had created nothing but more suffering. By the 8th year, I started researching Nicole's background more thoroughly. I learned that she was completely alone. No family left to support her, no one to visit her in prison, no one fighting for her appeal. By the 9th year, I came across a newspaper article about prison conditions that mentioned Nicole's case in passing. The reporter had interviewed several inmates about the lack of rehabilitation programs, and Nicole was described as having given up all hope of appeal and being a shell of her former self. The article mentioned that Nicole blamed herself for Melissa's death, believing that her public confrontation with Dr. Kane had somehow triggered the events that led to the accident. It said she'd attempted suicide twice and had stopped eating regularly, convinced she deserved whatever punishment came her way. Reading about Nicole, alone in prison, destroyed by guilt over something she hadn't done, wasting away because she believed she deserved to suffer, broke something in me that had been barely holding together for 9 years. I realized that Nicole was exactly like Emma, so damaged by trauma that she believed she deserved punishment even for things she hadn't done. Dr. Kane had created that same self-destructive psychology in dozens of children, and now, Nicole was trapped in the same mental prison that was slowly killing my sister. By the 10th year, 3 days ago, everything changed. Emma killed herself. I found her in the bathroom with an empty bottle of sleeping pills. This time, there was no saving her. She was already gone. Next to her body was a handwritten note. In her careful, shaky handwriting, she'd written, "I can't live knowing that I made you into a killer. I know what you did to try to protect me, and I know that girl died because of me. I've destroyed you just like Dr. Kane destroyed us. I can't carry this guilt anymore. I'm sorry I made you into someone you were never supposed to be. Maybe now you can tell the truth and save that woman in prison. I love you. Emma." She blamed herself. For my crime. For Melissa's death. For Nicole's imprisonment. She thought that everything I'd done was her fault because I'd done it to protect her. Emma died believing she was responsible for a murder she hadn't committed, just like Nicole was doing in prison. My silence hadn't protected Emma. It had killed her. The person I'd committed murder to save was dead because of the guilt from that same murder. And in her final moments, Emma was still thinking about Nicole. Still trying to take care of other people, even when she was ending her own life. She was right about one thing. I have to tell the truth now. Not just for Nicole, but for Emma. Because Emma's last wish was for me to free the woman who's been paying for my crime. Nicole is going to die in prison believing she's responsible for Melissa's death. Melissa's family will never get real justice. Dr. Kane is going to keep destroying children until the day he dies of old age, protected by his grief and his foundation and his untouchable reputation. And Emma is dead because she couldn't live with the weight of my secrets. I'm going to confess. I'm going to tell the police exactly what I did, how I did it, and why I did it. I'm going to make sure Nicole is released immediately. I'm going to face whatever consequences come next. I'm not doing this because I'm brave. I'm doing it because Emma asked me to, and I owe her at least that much. I'm not doing this because I think it will somehow make up for what I did. Nothing can bring Melissa back. Nothing can give Nicole her 10 years back. Nothing can bring Emma back to life. I'm doing this because it's what Emma wanted. Because Nicole deserves her freedom. Because Melissa's family deserves the truth. And because Dr. Kane needs to face real justice. Not the vigilante murder I tried to commit, but actual legal consequences for the decades of abuse he's inflicted on vulnerable children. The police will investigate him now. With my confession, they'll have reason to look into his background, to interview his former residents, to dig into the pattern of broken children he's left behind. Maybe he'll finally face charges. Maybe he'll finally be stopped. Or maybe he won't. Maybe he's too well protected, too well connected, too careful about covering his tracks. But at least I'll have stopped making things worse. At least I'll have stopped letting innocent people pay for my crimes. 10 years ago, I thought I could deliver justice by taking the law into my own hands. I thought killing a monster would somehow balance the scales for all the evil he'd done. Instead, I learned that vigilante justice isn't justice at all. It's just another form of violence that creates more victims, more suffering, more injustice. Dr. Kane deserved to face consequences for what he did to Emma and dozens of other children. But he didn't deserve to be murdered by someone who appointed themselves judge, jury, and executioner. And Melissa definitely didn't deserve to die for her father's crimes. Nicole didn't deserve to lose 10 years of her life for something she didn't do. Emma didn't deserve to die believing she was responsible for a murder she had nothing to do with. None of the collateral damage I caused was worth the satisfaction of getting revenge on someone who had hurt the person I loved most. If you take anything from this story, let it be this. Justice and revenge are not the same thing. One is about accountability, healing, and preventing future harm. The other is about satisfying your own need for retribution, regardless of who gets hurt in the process. I chose revenge, and it made me into exactly the kind of person I was trying to stop. Someone who destroys innocent lives to get what they want. Dr. Kane hurt children because it gave him power and control. I killed an innocent woman because it made me feel like I was delivering justice. The motivations were different, but the result was the same. Innocent people suffered because someone decided their own needs mattered more than other people's lives. I can't undo what I did. I can't bring Melissa back. I can't give Nicole her 10 years back. I can't bring Emma back to life or erase the guilt that drove her to suicide. But I can finally tell the truth. I can finally stop being a coward. I can finally start trying to make amends for the damage I've caused. In a few hours, I'll be in police custody. Nicole will hopefully be free within days. Emma's last wish will finally be fulfilled. And maybe, someone will finally investigate Dr. Kane and stop him from hurting any more children. It won't bring Melissa back. It won't undo the 10 years of suffering I've caused. But it's the right thing to do. And after 10 years of being the wrong person, it's time to try being right. Emma, if you can somehow hear this, I want you to know that none of this was your fault. You didn't make me into a killer. You didn't cause Melissa's death. You didn't deserve any of the trauma you endured. You were the strongest, kindest, most resilient person I've ever known. You survived Dr. Kane's abuse. You survived living with a murderer for 10 years. And even in your final moments, you were thinking about someone else who needed help. I love you. I've always loved you. And I'm finally going to do what you asked me to do. Nicole, I hope you can forgive yourself now. I hope you can understand that Melissa's death was never your fault. I hope you can find some peace, some happiness, some way to rebuild after everything I took from you. You were a brave woman who tried to expose a predator. That didn't make you responsible for an accident you didn't cause. I was the one responsible, and I'm finally ready to pay for what I did. Melissa, I know I can't ask for your forgiveness. I know nothing I do now can make up for taking your life, for stealing your future, for cutting short all the good you were doing in the world. But I can make sure your death finally leads to some justice. I can make sure the truth comes out. I can make sure Nicole goes free and your father faces consequences for his crimes. It's not enough. It will never be enough. But it's all I can do. This is my confession. This is my truth. This is the end of 10 years of lies. The truth is, I'm a killer who spent 10 years letting an innocent woman pay for my crime while my sister died from the guilt of secrets I should have revealed years ago. But not anymore. Not for one more day. The lies end now, and whatever comes next, I deserve it. All of it. This is Unheard, bringing you the confessions you were never meant to hear. Subscribe for more episodes and share this story if it moved you. Send your confession to unheardchannel@gmail.com.